Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome North Carolina Board of Transportation member Tony Lathrop.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the final session of the 2023 Transportation Summit. This is a policy roundtable on funding the future of transportation. Disruptions that come with innovation, electric vehicles, automated and connected technology are bringing significant changes to the transportation industry. We know this firsthand here in North Carolina. Our economy is starting to be impacted by investments in EV, electric vehicle technology, such as our new Toyota battery facility near Greensboro and the VinFast project near Sanford. These are investments that will bring thousands of jobs to our state. Over the past few years, the pandemic and the introduction of these new technologies have shown us just how vulnerable the motor fuels tax is in the longer term. North Carolina maintains the second highest state-owned highway mileage in the nation, yet we invest less in this system than many other states across the country. With the impacts of changing demographics and our population growth, evolving technology, transportation investment has become top of mind for a long time. I was honored to serve as an advisory member of the North Carolina First Commission because I'm the finance chair and have been for 6 years of the North Carolina Board of Transportation. I joined business, finance, and public policy experts, and we met for nearly 2 years to help our state plan for the future of transportation, particularly transportation funding. The commission ultimately recommended increasing the total investment level over the next decade, the next 10 years, by at least $20 billion or $2 billion a year to get our existing system to where it needed to be. The commission also provided multiple options to be considered as ways to realize this increased investment target, including increasing the highway use tax, adopting a mileage-based user fee for electric and hybrid vehicles, raising our states, or raising NCDOT's in particular, debt to revenue ratio. And there's many other ideas. And what that served to do was to help start the conversation around these ideas, because we're going to have to, ultimately, we'll have to have consensus on what's best for our state so that we can maintain and enhance our transportation infrastructure. And a lot of great progress has been made on improving transportation investment, thanks to our federal and our state leaders, particularly in the General Assembly. We are certainly extremely grateful for the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law with the federal government. And closer to home, and to me more importantly, the budget that our state leaders in the General Assembly put forward and Governor Cooper signed into law last year, which includes a provision dedicating a portion of the state's sales tax revenue to fund transportation projects. And it's a portion that corresponds to tires and transportation-related things that are sold. And while these steps are big, really big, towards modernizing transportation funding in North Carolina, we know that there's much more work to do to keep up with the growing needs of our state. And that's why today we're having this conversation and why it's so important to have that conversation. So now I would like to introduce the session's moderator, Spectrum News anchor Loretta Beniti.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to moderate this session again this year. We have a panel of distinguished elected officials, and I'm sure you are interested to get their thoughts on everything you've been hearing for the last 2 days. Our first panelist is a North Carolina representative who serves Columbus and Robeson counties in District 46 in the North Carolina House. He's been there since 2016. He served as the senior chair of the Appropriations on Transportation Committee and the chair of the House Transportation Committee. Please welcome Representative Brenton Jones. Next is a North Carolina senator who has served Durham County's District 22 in North Carolina's Senate since 2013. He is currently a member of the Transportation Committee and the Joint Legislative Transportation Oversight Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mike Woodard. We also have a North Carolina senator who is serving Cumberland and Moore counties in District 21. That's a new district for him this year. He's been in the Senate since 2014. He was elected by his peers as the majority whip. He serves as the chair of the Transportation Committee, the Appropriation Committee for Transportation, and is a member of the Commerce and Education Committee. Let's welcome Senator Tom McGinnis. And our next guest has served as Onslow counties in District 15 in the North Carolina House since 2011. He served as a chair in the Appropriations on Transportation Committee and the chair of the House Transportation Committee as well. He is currently the co-chair of the Joint Legislative Transportation Oversight Committee. Please welcome Representative Phil Shepard. And our final panelist is the North Carolina Treasurer. He has served as State Treasurer since 2017. He also spent 4 terms in the North Carolina House of Representatives, including a term as the Speaker Pro Tem from 2011 to 2013. Please welcome Treasurer Dale Falwell. We're grateful to have each of these distinguished panelists for our discussion, and I'll go ahead and take my seat so we can actually start this discussion. So let's kind of start with that overarching question first for all of you, and I'll start with you, Representative Jones. You know, we're just starting this session right now. What are your priorities for transportation for this long session?
Well, thank you, Loretta, and thank you for being here, everyone. They've not changed. We are a product of North Carolina work, which I want to say means in my mind is we've caused ourselves a great problem. We've become the greatest state in the union that everybody wants to be at. So not only are we facing some road and transportation issues from time, we're now having to run ahead and get prepared for the industries that are moving to our state. I'm going to say that we're becoming like the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in North Carolina. We're offering everything. So we're working very diligently through everything to make sure we do the proper funding for this state, that we don't get behind. We're going to be proactive, not reactive. And I think over the last session with these gentlemen that we did a great job moving the bar forward the first time in many, many years, addressing a lot of the transportation funding issue. More to do, but I do believe that we did a lot.
Senator Woodard, I'm going to pose that question to you. You're the one distinguished Democrat here on the stage, so you bring a little bit of the perspective from the other side of the aisle as well. What are your priorities for transportation?
Well, for planes, trains, and automobiles, you John Candy, I'm Steve Martin. Is that what we're going to do this year?
You trying to say I'm the fat guy? Come on now. Nah.
You know, I think transportation, Loretta, to your question, is the one place where we've seen a lot of bipartisanship in these last few sessions. And I'm sitting here with my Republican friends and colleagues, but we have spent many nights and weekends and many phone calls and texts working together to craft good bipartisan legislation that has received support from both parties, both chambers, and then ultimately the governor, with the support of DOT, obviously. So I would say my priorities are not that much different from Representative Jones, but to keep transportation moving. At the top of my list to do that, though, clearly is revenue modernization. We have talked about that with many of you in this setting and in various industry groups over the last few years, and that is going to continue to be top of the list. We know the gas tax is starting to go down dramatically. I think, working together, we did great work in the last budget, as Board Member Lathrop just mentioned. We've got a lot of work left to do on that. And I would say that's 1A, 1B is the modernization of transportation itself, electric vehicles and a lot of the other things, and making sure that our department's ready for that, and most importantly, our drivers and taxpayers are ready for that.
Senator McInnes, same question to you, your priorities.
Well, I'm going to dig just a little bit deeper because they've covered the 30,000-foot view, and I want to get just a little bit deeper. We've got an issue with our Department of Transportation employees that some of them are not being paid enough to meet the current demands of the marketplace. And we've got to take a strong look at that. We've got a situation where a new hire is being paid more than the existing person that's been there for 25 years, we've got a problem. And we've got to attack that problem and address it, and we've got to do it. And the DOT is doing a good job of that. I mean, I'm not casting any blame on them from the standpoint, this is just a matter of the marketplace that we find ourselves in. And we've also, of course, got to make sure that our contractors have adequate work to do to keep them strong and resilient, but we've also got to make sure we don't put too much business out there to where we choke the system. Because we want to make sure our taxpayers get their value for the dollar that we spend on these roads and these airports and these ports. We have come a long way. Representative Jones hit the nail on the head because we are recognized now as the #1 destination for business in America, and for that matter, North America and the world. We got to keep that position, and the way we do it is to move the ball forward and don't rest on our laurels.
Okay. Representative Shepard, your turn.
Thank you, Loretta, and thank you all for being here today and letting us be a part of this panel. I want to go back to the overhead view just a little bit to mention that a lot of people don't know this in the public. North Carolina has more state roads than any state in the country except for Texas. Along with that, we're not just financing roads, we're financing bridges, we're doing terminal groins and dredging in our rivers and water streams, and also airports and railroad. All of those, as well as, are part of our transportation system. So we've got to continue to find innovative ways to fund those systems. Last session it was mentioned we put 6% more of the sales tax into transportation. Several states in the country already were doing that. They were taking general funds and moving to transportation because they had to have it to make it all work together. It's important because when we see orange barrels around the state of North Carolina, it means people are working and people have jobs. I also saw this morning in the session that started this morning that I think it's 42% this coming year are going to be transportation and jobs dealing with bridges and replacement of bridges. With that being said and done, that's good news. But back to what Senator McInnes said, we've got to find qualified workers. As it was during COVID, we still have people that aren't willing to go back to work. So that's a challenge for transportation and something we need to look at as well. Thank you all.
Treasurer Falwell, let me ask you this. You know, you're not sitting in the legislature actually writing these laws, but as the treasurer, are there things that you feel like need to be being done in the transportation realm?
Well, at the Treasurer's Office and as Keeper of the Public Purse, we have a great working relationship with the legislature and especially the legislative staff. And we talk about DOT employees, but there's people behind these legislators, the legislative staff, Lisa Hollowell and so many others who not only have their intuition in their brains, but also their heart into addressing the long-term needs of the transportation needs of North Carolinians. I will say this is, I guess, the second or third year I've been on this panel, and they never mention motorcycles. It's always trains, planes, and automobiles, but they never mention motorcycles. If everybody rode a motorcycle, we probably wouldn't have such a highway need. But my job is...
Should we add in side-by-sides now as well?
Yeah, well, if you call that a motorcycle, then that's fine. But I will say, as the Keeper of the Public Purse, our job, especially through the Local Government Commission, is to make sure, no pun intended, that the DOT is operating within its budgetary guardrails. And we've had a great working relationship with Secretary Boyette and his complete staff to get the DOT back on a path to be sustainable and solvent, not just for the road users, but for the road vendors and the taxpayers in North Carolina. So that's what we focus on, and we have had a great working relationship with Secretary Boyette and their team, and we look forward to continuing that relationship.
So we can't ever talk about transportation these days without actually talking about transportation funding, which was touched on in a lot of your answers. The bipartisan infrastructure law at the federal level and the state sales tax revenue transfer to the highway fund have certainly helped with transportation in North Carolina, but we know that there's more work to be done. How would you like to see transportation funded in the future? Senator Woodard, we'll go to you first for your grand idea of how this can happen.
Well, as I think we've shared with you all before in this setting and with other groups, to me, it has to be considering all the options and put them all on the table. I know y'all have heard me use this analogy before, but it's like that game Jenga, if you know where the pieces of wood are there and you try to pull one out and keep the tower together. I see transportation funding as that kind of a model. You know, we've got to have all of these things to hold it together, and if we start pulling one out, we run the risk of losing the model. So, you know, we talked about many different options. You know, we've had a number of study groups look at this, whether it was the North Carolina Chamber, the First NC, the NC10, that some of you have worked with us on at the legislature, have proposed a number of different models. I hope that as we enter this new biennium, that we'll consider all of those options, take nothing from the table now, look at what impact it will have on DOT budget and completing and maintaining our infrastructure, and understanding what the concerns are about those. And I know there will be concerns about any time, whether it's highway use tax or VMT, or we talk about tolling. Those are all things that are on the table, and those all have an impact. And I hope Senator McInnes will use his often used line, but I'm going to continue to say that we must all invest in North Carolina's infrastructure if we want to continue to be that top state for business and top place to live in the country.
Senator McInnes, there are so many options that we've heard talked about as we're heading into this long session. Do you think there's some that should be at that top of that conversation?
Well, you know, I will use my comment that Senator Woodard mentioned, and that's everybody will get a haircut, but nobody will get skinned. And that's the way it's got to work, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot any longer allow 50% of our money stream coming from one place, because the danger in that is just astronomical. And we will see the fruits of that labor as we go on. With a car that used to get 8 miles to the gallon is now getting 30 miles to the gallon. Easy math. A fourth grader can do that one. The electric cars, of course, no gas tax. So the hybrids, they're getting 40, 60, 80 miles to the gallon. I mean, we understand that that is going away. Nothing can be taken from the table. Everything's gotta be part and parcel and touched in this process, and everybody's going to get a little touch. But again, folks, if we're going to continue to stay on the cutting edge of the greatest state to do business in this country, we've got to be on the cutting edge of having the best transportation system in America, and this is the way we'll do it.
Representative Shepard, the two senators have answered this question. Obviously, the House has a lot more members that all have to get on board with this idea of money coming from different areas. How are those conversations going in the House?
Well, we had a very good breakout session today that I attended that talked about mileage-based funding for transportation. Some states are moving in that direction, and I think part of the federal government, there's a statute that requires us to start looking at that as well. And I'm certainly open to all those options, any options that we have to keep our funding where it is, because with all the funding that we have now, last session we put extra money in to make up for the difference in inflation, which helped us with some of our projects. And the Senate and the House both supported that initiative as well as transportation. But with mileage-based funding or any initiative that we have, I think we have to get the stakeholders in the state involved in that, whether it be the Chamber of Commerce's across the state, some of our local leaders, some of the citizens in our state that are interested in how we're going to fund transportation in the future, because it's critical to our state as we continue to grow. We're the 9th largest state in the country now. We'll soon be the 8th largest state. So I think if we get the stakeholders involved and we do this together as a team, it will be our responsibility. But I believe if we do it as a team, we can sell it to people back home. And that's where we've got to sell it, was with the taxpayers and those that use our highways and our roads and infrastructure. Thank you.
If you excuse me for 1 second, if I get one good cough out, I'll stop. And I see that Treasurer Falwell has the cough drop for me. Okay, Treasurer Falwell, you always like to talk about the purse strings. So when we're talking about funding for something as major as transportation, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think about it not only as the keeper of the public purse, but I think about it during my time as a blue-collar worker, where I was driving between 2 cities, taking classes at Winston-Salem State, UNCG, and working 3 jobs. And I think about the cars I was driving back then, very inefficient. So I'm always trying not to look through the lens, no disrespect to the people in the audience, but try to look through the lens of the invisible people of this state. The people, especially those that make their living with their hands, their back, and their feet, who have to work 3 jobs or maybe drive between 2 campuses and a house. So that's how I think about this. Now, when I think about that, I think about not where we can get revenue, but where we can cut cost. I think there has to be a conversation about how we can cut the cost of repairing and building roads in North Carolina. And then once the cost is addressed, then we look at the balance sheet and see what the capability is. You know, the DOT is in much better shape than it was 3 years ago financially. I brought a couple of charts here, shocking, Loretta. But,
you love your
yeah, but this, sorry you can't probably see this in the back, but this was the credit card of the North Carolina Department of Transportation last year, where basically they had maxed out the credit card based on some expenditures that happened over the last few years. And based on the efficiencies within the DOT, better financial management, and some things that the General Assembly did, you know, now the DOT has a little bit of headroom as far as borrowing capacity. That did not happen last year. They had already sort of hit their head on the ceiling, but now they have some borrowing capacity. So I think a focus on the cost is number 1, and then look at your budget to see what you can afford is number 2. But thirdly, try to put yourself in the shoes of the average person in this state, many of whom make a living with their hands and their back and their feet. They can't work remotely. They have to go somewhere to do their job every day. And I represent a lot of those at the Treasurer's Office, and they have to be considered when you're looking at any revenue source.
And we'll finish up with you, Representative Jones, on this issue. It's obviously such a broad topic and so many answers to it, but do you have a sense of how the House is going to be heading in this funding direction?
Well, I want to go back to the last session where we planned for the future. And I think we've missed this. And most of the time I never use notes, but this was very important. So I actually made a Dale Folwell note. It works for him, so. In the fiscal year 2020, the motor vehicle fuel tax revenue was $1.9 billion, with $1.35 billion, or 71%, going to the highway fund, and $563 million, or 29%, to the highway trust fund. That was according to the NC First Commission. With what we did with the program that we put in place to 246, estimating spending to be what's done in the previous years, you'll see an additional $193 million in sales tax revenues to the state highway fund. By 2025, that will triple to $600 million a year and continue at about a 6% annual sales tax in future years. With the increase of the fuel tax that we just went 36 to 40, you will look at a $1.9 to $2.1 billion jump. We did all this without raising taxes. That's a bunch more money going into the pot that we've never seen before. So I think in this last session, we made great planning for the future. And I think it puts us in a good spot to be fiscally conservative and to continue with these kind of ideas from, and I'm gonna tell you folks, the sausage making, as we call it with this, takes a lot of folks. It's not a Republican issue, it's not a Democrat issue, but this is sitting down with Secretary Boyette, his staff, with the senators, with the representatives, with the industry folks. There were many, many hours put into those ideas. And it's proven that what North Carolina is doing is working, and I have no doubt that we will continue that good work with good ideas while being fiscally conservative in this state.
I think while we're talking about the funding issue, it's a good time to talk about the Highway Trust Fund, because we obviously have known that the Highway Trust Fund was suffering in recent years, and Treasurer Falwell, that's not the case now.
Well, it's not the case, and I'm not normally known for my optimism or my humor, but see, they laughed at my humor. You said they wouldn't, Senator. But as far as optimism is concerned, I came here today to present a check, and this check is where everybody in this audience and the viewing audience knows that the Highway Trust Fund, over $1 billion was taken out of the Highway Trust Fund a few years ago. And this is Christmas in January for the state of North Carolina, because the Finance Department and Secretary Boyette reported to me just a few weeks ago that $1 billion, $1.1 billion that had been taken out of the Highway Trust Fund has now been replenished. And so I'd like to call Secretary Boyette up here and present that to him if we can. I don't know where he is.
If Secretary Boyette is around.
Yeah.
So, here he is.
This is not NC cash, so I just want to make sure that's right. So, you know, I'm always known for tearing up checks, so I want you to have this one, and just want to thank you on behalf of the citizens of North Carolina and all your team that are out here in the audience and back at work for what you've done. This $1.1 billion that was paid off in half of the scheduled time.
That's right.
Half of the scheduled time. So congratulations, and I know this has a lot of people that you'd like to thank, so I'd like to give this to you, and thank you on behalf of the citizens of North Carolina for paying this off in half the time as scheduled.
Thank you, Treasurer. Thank you so much.
We're going to share like we always do. No, honestly, Treasurer, I'm going to tell you, we've got a great fiscal staff. We've got a great team that when we sit down and look at something, we get it accomplished. And with the partnership with your office and the State Budget Office, we got it done. So thank you.
Congratulations.
Sir, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to another topic now. Over the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of conversations that have taken place about the future of transportation technologies, a lot of interesting stuff. We also know that North Carolina maintains the second largest highway system in the country. So how do we maintain our current infrastructure and prepare for what's needed in the years to come? And we'll start with you, Senator.
Loretta, that's a wonderful question that is very, very applicable to this complete summit that we're involved in here. If you go down and look at the displays and see the van that's got all the workstations in it and all the information there for the drones that are being employed across North Carolina by DOT, you'll see the cutting edge of the technology that we're putting our arms around here in North Carolina. We're right now, today, in real time, using those drones to do inspections on bridges across North Carolina from Manio to Murphy. These drones, of course, don't fall off ladders, don't get hurt, don't have problems with heights and snakes and wasps and all the other things that we find under a bridge. They're able to go in and make the inspection and to be able to bring that information back and observe it in real time, condense it to a spreadsheet and say we've got X number of bridges that are in need of work and X number that are passing our inspection. That's just one issue right there. And then we have the new issue that we've already seen, and we've been apprised of it for several weeks now, of the ability to use the technology to inspect the roadways and to find out where our deficiencies are in our roadways. That's been one of the big things, ladies and gentlemen. We've had to send our men and women who are so great at their job, but doing things that technology could do at a savings for them, especially for their health, safety, and welfare. So these are the things that we've got to do. We've got to use every bit of the technology that we have to get a better product. Again, 80,000 plus road miles, that's a problem if we don't maintain those roads.
Representative Shepherd, how much of a balancing act is this of wanting to gear towards these new technologies, but also having these traditional issues that we have with all these mines?
Sometimes it can be quite tough. I will give kudos to Representative Torbett that used to be in transportation. He helped to walk us through the drones. He was very involved in the drone situation and making sure that we had laws that were applicable for that when it came about, to be in front of it instead of be behind it. I think that it's a balancing act. We have to look at what people are using today compared to what they were using. I know at one time here in the Triangle area, a lot of young people were not even getting a driver's license. They were taking the buses and city mobiles around and so forth. So, you know, in my area, everybody still wants to get a driver's license and drive and have their own trucks and do their own thing. But in the urban areas, it's quite different. So we have to balance what we do for the urban areas versus what we do in the rural areas because they're quite different, the needs and the wants. At the same time, it all takes funding. So that's what I think the next hurdle for us is going to be. Treasurer Falwell says, well, you know, we may be looking at ways of doing things cheaper. That's always an option. We should do that, always. But at the same time, we also need to look at new innovative ways to raise funds to finance all the needs that we're going to have in our state in the coming years.
Treasurer Falwell, do you have thoughts on this, of the technology versus the traditional?
Well, everybody in this room knows I'm not the technologist, so, but I do want to just comment on what Representative Jones said. You know, that chart I held up about the DOT having more borrowing capacity, in the words of former Congressman Howard Coble, that just didn't jump up on the table by itself. All these facts that he just mentioned is the reason why that the DOT now has more borrowing capacity. All the things that he just mentioned and the sustainability of that over the next several years. And then all that is what ultimately got the Highway Trust Fund replenished in half the time possible. So none of these things jump up on the table by themselves. It's a result of clarity of thought and having the discipline which he just described earlier among all the legislature last year.
Representative Jones, how much does that discussion revolve around we want to be forward thinking with what's coming in the transportation field, but we can't leave those potholes on the street. We can't let those bridges deteriorate.
Well, it is a great balancing act. You must, coming from a very, very rural area, we are, of course, secondary roads, which come behind our roads that we're trying to get to our industry where we've got to really focus. But if you quit growing, you start dying. There's several hundred people here with several hundred ideas. And each one of us, I know these gentlemen just like I do, we take each one of those ideas and we vet those ideas and we run those ideas and we look and we get, as the treasurer stated, our staff. You know, people don't see, again, we'll call it the sausage making behind the scene, but the hours and hours and hours that these folks will take this idea that looks really good on paper. But then when we apply it to the real world, it may not be as good an idea. So we go through thousands of ideas, but we'll find that one, and that one is really good. And that's kind of where we got with the last budget. We found some ideas that didn't work in the past. We were looking to the future. And as a group, Senate, House, transportation guys over with Boyette, we said, you know what, we can't look 10 months down the road. We can't even look 10 years down the road. We've got to be looking 25, 30, 40 years down the road and make those preparations now. And I think we've done a really, really good job, but there is growth every day in this state. And we're going to find a way to continue with those good ideas and be fiscally conservative at the same time.
Senator Woodard, you represent Durham, so a more urbanized area, so you see the need to move more people around the area where you are. So, you know, we look at all the technologies that are downstairs that we've been seeing. How much is it that we want to get those technologies implemented, and how much is it we need to make sure everybody who's here right now can move around?
Yeah, I mean, representing an urban area, Durham County, RTP, Greater Triangle area, we're moving more people in. I mean, you know, we're expecting the Triangle to grow another 1 million people over the next decade or so, and so where are those people? How are we going to move them to the jobs and to and from their homes? So we've got to consider all the technologies that are out there. Some of them aren't necessarily new technologies. You know, whether that's commuter rail, that's not a new technology. There are new ways that we can introduce that. Bike and pedestrian amenities are an important part of our urban commuting patterns. Those aren't new technologies either. There are new ways we can incorporate them into our existing infrastructure and expand them. I think as we do that, Senator McKinnis touched on technologies in the construction and maintenance, but we also got to consider the new technologies in the vehicles that we're using, whatever they're like. We got to think about EVs way more than traditional gas and diesel vehicles. That's going to be more wear and tear on our roads. So we've got to consider that in all of the funding things that we do. Now we're talking about bridges. For the last decade, I've represented 3 neighboring rural counties. That's where our bridges, I think, are failing the worst. And you let one of those rural bridges fail, you shut down a community for a long time. We've got to consider all of those things when we're looking at technologies, moving people, doing a better job with maintenance and construction, and considering how we move folks around.
So part of the funding of the future of transportation includes investing in the workforce. We've heard this from some of the panelists already. Recruiting and retention bonuses were approved during the last session. What else can be done to recruit and retain state employees to ensure that we continue down the right path?
Well, I think we have to sell them on the area that we want them to live. In North Carolina is a great place to move to and to live, as we're having thousands of people are moving here all the time, and they're coming because what the General Assembly and done in the state in the last several years, they've made it conducive to come here. We're one of the best states in the country to do business with. So we've got those things. We have things that are family oriented that we have. We've got our beaches, we've got our mountains. Nowhere else can you go and live and enjoy what we have in the state of North Carolina. So we've got to do a better job, I think, of selling people on North Carolina. So if you move here, you're going to have a low unemployment, and you're going to have people that are going to work. And people in our DOT, I know many of them myself personally. They give back in our communities. They coach baseball and softball, and they're part of our churches and our civic organizations. And they're the people I go to a lot of times. If we need something done, they're willing to go above and beyond. Senator McKinnis mentioned our DOT employees. I've never found one that isn't always out there for his neighbor when a hurricane comes or a bridge is out. They're the ones that are out there during the bad weather and the storms, and they're doing all that they can do. And we certainly aren't giving them back what they need to be having or should have. And I just want to give kudos to them as well as Senator McKinnis. And so we need to also do more to help them in salaries and so forth that goes along with that as a good place to live and work.
Treasurer Falwell, you've sat in the legislature before as decisions are being made with state employees, and now as the treasurer. What are your thoughts on how we can recruit and retrain?
I'll be glad to address that. I wanted to comment on what Senator Woodard said just briefly. And you think about Stokes County in rural North Carolina. Brown Road was not a bridge failure. It was a washout of a road. And you could not get from King, North Carolina to Danbury, North Carolina, which is the county seat, for a long, long time. So in addition to what he's saying about bridges, it's just roads washing away and based on the supply chain not being able to get the material in there to actually fix it to help the citizens. On top of that, we have some bridges that will not hold the capacity that the farmers need in this state. So they have to go a long way around to carry their goods. Just another bridge issue. On the retaining and recruitment of state employees, I've said this many times. You cannot be in any relationship, personally or professionally or faith-based, where all you do is you never get credit for what you do for people in the relationship. I think that we can do a much better job of explaining to new employees what these benefit packages really mean. The individual premium on the state health plan is $25 a month. It has been $25 a month for 5 years, and we have not messed around with co-pays and deductibles. And with the rising cost of health care, especially single employees need to understand the value of only paying $25 a month. Our family premium is way too high, and our spousal premium is too high, and our single parent, one dependent premium is way too high. But when you take the health care benefits while they're employed, and then on top of that, the fact that they're participating in one of the strongest, most well-funded pension plans in the United States, we can do a better job of telling that story, because I know most 23-year-olds are not interested in what they're going to earn in retirement. But if a 23-year-old ever talks to a 55-year-old and says, "What do you wish somebody would have told you when you were my age?" They learn about how this is important. So doing a better job of selling the value and the virtue of our pension plan, of the value and the virtue of a sustainable health care plan, especially with a $25 premium. I just think we can do a better job of getting credit for things that they're already funding. And I take responsibility for that as the state treasurer. It's very hard to get people to focus on that. We have nearly 1 million people on this pension plan now. 1 out of 10 adult North Carolinians at the state and local level are on this pension plan. And doing a job of describing what this really is going to mean with some point in their life is going to be, I think, highly important to retaining and recruiting folks. And the last thing I would say is that the whole time I was growing up, and some of these gentlemen may remember this, you've always heard the term close enough for government work. Well, before there was a term close enough for government work, there was a term called good enough for government work. That was a very positive term back after World War II. Good enough for government work, if you're talking about it, worked at Western Electric or anybody else who was supporting our efforts in Europe. Good enough for government work means it was the best. When you did something that was good enough for government work, it wasn't substandard, it was like the best. And if we can instill that joy of achievement and upward mobility back in especially our beginning public servants, and explain to them the value that they're having on their community, I think we could do a better job of retaining and recruiting state employees.
Representative Jones, there's obviously several high points of what the state does offer now. Do you think there's anything new that the legislature needs to consider in order to do this recruiting and retaining?
Yes, but yes to each, especially Senator McInnes. We'd never see a new hire making more than a guy that's been on for 10 or 15 years. Maybe unpopular with the private sector, but we've got to get more creative to be able to offer things that the private sector can offer. One problem that we have with the younger generation several years ago, it was almost beat into them that they don't have to work as hard to get things that they want. That would not have worked in my departed father's home. You worked or you did not get. And I think we've missed some of that. Throwing money at a problem is not a way to solve a problem, but utilizing those dollars in the best way. We've got great employees in this state across the board, and I think they should be rewarded for their hard work. I'll go to my division. My guys are awesome. There's never a time that I call them that they do not handle my problem within 48 hours. They're basically on call 24/7. But I think we've got to get creative because younger folks, I'm noticing, being in the private sector and having to hire, the dollar figure is not really what draws them to the job. It's the benefits of what they get, what extras for them. So I think we've got to be really creative going forward to what are we offering them? How does that job look compared to what it looked like 10 years ago? How can we make that job more attractive to maintain the younger folks? It's almost like the farming. The average age of a farmer in North Carolina is 58 years old. What are we going to do in 10 years? So, there's initiatives with NC State and A&T and different things to draw young farmers in. How can they make it look different for them? And I think we as a state have got to find and be creative drawing those young folks into the state jobs.
You agree with that, Senator Woodard?
Thinking about this, I think is recruitment. And when I think about the recruitment, and I think about this in a lot of job areas that we have, whether that's our burgeoning life sciences, healthcare, sciences, manufacturing that are growing in this state. And I think the same is true of our transportation jobs, our engineering, and in the actual construction of our infrastructure. We've got to start recruiting young people into these careers earlier. We need to start talking to them. You can't have a job fair when they're in 11th or 12th grade because they may not be on the right track. They might not be taking the right courses. We might want them taking an extra math class, or we might want them to take some job training or get into an apprentice program. I tutor 2 mornings a week at a Title I school in East Durham, and I couldn't have been more prouder last year when one of the students I tutored, Tanya, came up to me, showed me her EOG results, and she had 94% on her math. And I said, Tanya, do you know what somebody who's smart in math like you could do? And she really didn't really have a clue. You know, Tanya might be that next scientist who cures cancer, or she might be that engineer who develops a new style bridge that's stronger and cheaper to build. And we need to start reaching these kids and showing them what those opportunities are and helping attract them to the engineering careers and to the building careers that we need in transportation, showing them that they are good, solid careers that can pay well as long as we're continuing to provide that funding to pay them well.
Senator McInnes, you obviously touched on this a little bit already, but you know, when we talk about this idea of recruiting and retaining, do you have other thoughts on this?
Let me talk a little bit about the current staff we have at NCDOT. Back a few weeks ago, Moore County, my home county where I live and sleep at night, was impacted by a substation that was attacked by an infidel. We don't know, it might have been more than one, but they caused the power to go out at about 40,000 households in my county, which is basically the whole county. And we didn't know what was going on that Saturday night, but we figured it out pretty quick. And at that very moment in time, we got on the phone with the Division 8 engineer, Patrick Norman, and told him what was going on, that every stoplight was out in Moore County. And we've got 2 United States highways that come through there, 501 and United States Highway 1. And we knew that people would be coming from other areas that would not know that there was a problem there and only find out when they got there. So we were able to mobilize our NCDOT men and women that night to bring their trucks out with the flashing lights and put on every intersection, every major intersection in Moore County. Now these folks got out of their bed, put their clothes on, and came to work in the interest of saving lives in Moore County and North Carolina. They made us look good. I got a compliment yesterday on that issue. Now, that's the kind of people we have working there now, and that's the kind of people we want to have working there in the future, that have the got to, can do, and will do attitude. But we got a problem. We've got 58 community colleges in North Carolina that all operate as a single silo. The idea of regionalization and collaboration has not been before brought forward to these folks. And some of them, quite frankly, have lost their idea of the mission statement, because it is not the mission of the community college system to send everybody to a 4-year college. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the mission of the community college system to get people a job that pays a living wage, that they can live in their home and support their family. And if some college goes along with it, that's all fine and well. But we need to be teaching the trades. And we need a collaboration with some of our community colleges to come together and teach these courses, these trades that are so vital to the operation of NCDOT. And I'll be bringing forth some legislation on this very issue that'll be coming up in the next few weeks, of collaboration and regionalization for the trades and the craftsmen of this state, so that we can continue to move our state forward.
Representative Jones, I want to ask you about this. So we obviously have all seen inflation that's been going on. You know, we hear that word recession as a potential coming up. When we talk about all of these major projects that we're working on with transportation, these are all really expensive projects to start with. And then you add inflation dollars on top of it. How much is this going to affect what we can do in our state?
It's going to affect it greatly. But since 2010, this legislature has been very fiscally conservative. We came in, we paid a big debt, and we've put money in the bank. So we've been very careful how we spend this money. After the budget, inflation rose, we went back in and kind of did an inflation rider to make sure that these projects that we had all over the state were well funded. So as we're looking, as the gentlemen here know, we don't have a spend number yet. We don't know what figure we're going to be working on. So we will take an account as the daily moves, the numbers change, that we will be very fiscally conservative in how we fund. Will everything get funded? Absolutely not. It's never. Is it a budget that everyone loves? Absolutely not. But it's a budget that all of us live with. It was a good budget, and it brought living wages to folks. So as we move forward, We will prioritize those projects, and we will work from the 1 all the way back down, making sure that we are able to fund those projects.
Senator Witter, that's always something hard for somebody in their area because perhaps the funding's just not there to do it. How hard is you've been in the legislature for a while now. How hard is it to figure out that funding when you don't potentially know if inflation will go higher or lower? What's going to happen with it?
Well, we're lucky to have good fiscal staff in the General Assembly who I think guide us very well. And I will say, listening to Representative Jones, it reminded me while we've navigated these waters, we have great fiscal staff in the department too. And Undersecretary Boyette's leadership these last few years, as a result of House Bill 77 that we worked on and put a lot of new guideposts in place that I think have had the department run more fiscally sound so that the treasurer can keep handing out those nice checks to the secretary. More of those are coming. I think we put a little more discipline and a little more better controls in the system. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a science to it. There's some scientific algorithms that help us determine things, but in the end, it's art about how we do that. So it's all of us listening to those needs. And then obviously communicating. I was in local government for 7 years before I came here. I chaired an MPO for 3 of those 7 years. So I understand very well watching the state budget go through all of its iterations, particularly the DOT budget, what it's like to communicate to local governments the challenges they have in wanting the projects that they feel are important to their community be funded or not funded or delayed or moved to an out year. And those are all very frustrating things. But I think as Representative Jones said, we're in a far better picture than we were just a few years ago and even a decade ago.
Senator McGinnis, you've sat on appropriations committees, chaired the subcommittees in the Senate. Do you have concerns with the inflation numbers we see and what that could mean for transportation?
Well, absolutely, and the big problem is the unknown, as we just alluded to. When we already were behind in our maintenance and upkeep of our roads, and then the inflation goes from 2% to 12%, all it did is just exasperate it with a lot of dollars and a lot of numbers. I want to use I-95 as the example. If we modernized and brought I-95 to its modern standards today, we're talking several $billions. Now, the only way we're going to get that done is to toll I-95. And I know that doesn't sit well with some people, but I'm going to tell you, folks, if you go down to Florida, if you go down to Georgia and you ride on I-95 where it's tolled, it's about 10 lanes. You could eat off the center line out there. There's no trash, and it's maintained properly and exclusively for that driving public. We've got to modernize I-95. That's just one piece of the puzzle. But we're prepared for the downturn. We're going to have some kind of recession. We're going to have some kind of bump in the road. I don't think it's going to be bad because we've got too much steam behind us and too much wind in our sails. But I can tell you that North Carolina is sitting in the catbird seat, Mr. Treasurer, because we got $5+ billion in the rainy day fund. We're prepared for the rainy day, and we've got a surplus that's sitting there ready to be employed just as well. So I think we're in good shape, but we can't let our guard down.
Is this something you're thinking about as we're going into the long session?
I'm very concerned about it because of we've been proactive since Representative Jones said 2010, 2011. We made some tough decisions in 2011 when we came into the General Assembly. We were at the height of a recession. Unemployment was like 13, 14% in many places and so forth. And we made a lot of cuts and we slimmed things down and it put us where we need to be though when it comes to we cut taxes, corporate taxes, income taxes, but it put us where we needed to be to draw other businesses to come to the state of North Carolina, which has given us this growth spurt. My concern is not necessarily North Carolina, but the federal deficit that we have, and they hit the ceiling today, I understand, and we all knew it was going to do that, is the effect that that's going to have on the state of North Carolina. I'm glad that we've got $5 billion in the coffers for rainy day fund, but I also think we're not sure what's going to happen with the way the federal government is. And I'm just going to stop right there because I know Treasurer Falwell has got a better idea how that's going to impact us, and I'd love to hear from him on that.
The national debt of the United States is the single biggest national security issue of my lifetime. I believe I'm accurate in saying this. People always rely on what I say, but with the increase in the national debt and the increase in interest rates that have occurred in the last 22 months, it's possible that just the increased interest expense of your federal government exceeds the military budget. That's why it's a national security issue. And what North Carolina has to do is protect ourselves from Washington's addiction for money, because eventually it's going to come home to roost. And Loretta, I know that oftentimes on your shows and otherwise you talk about inflation and recession, but there's an S word that existed before you were born called stagflation. That is the single worst word that could ever hit the Department of Transportation. Stagflation is where interest rates are going up and economic activity is going down. It's a very serious matter. So what the DOT would suffer in that respect is increased borrowing cost, increased to borrow money, and less revenues and higher costs for goods and services. That is the worst of all worlds as far as the DOT. And that's something that we have to keep a very, very close eye on. The state geo debt, many of you have heard, is falling by 60% over 8 years. 5 of those years are already in the oven, and I've already pre-refunded the next 3 years. So the state geo debt falling 60% is already a done deal, in addition to these reports you've heard about the rainy day fund and the surpluses and the highway trust fund. So all these things have to be taken into account, but they have to be done not in an emotional way and not in a political way, but in a mathematical way. Because at the end of the day, this is just all about mathematics. And I didn't get a chance a moment ago, and I did want to add this about employee retention. One thing that we're going to put forward the legislature this year is to have a 401-457 match for state employees. Many of you know that we manage the 401-457 not just for state employees, but local employees. The participation by local employees in these defined contribution plans, which puts the responsibility of retirement readiness in their hands through employee deductions. The difference between the state employee and the local employee is double. The local employees contribute twice as, their enrollment percentages are twice as much as a state employee. Now, why is that? The reason is that the state does not offer a 401-457 match. And so part of our legislative agenda this year is to start not on a percentage, because with all due respect, a percentage benefits somebody like me who makes what I make. We're not talking about folks like me. We're talking about the entry-level DOT and other public service worker. This 401-457 match should not be a percentage. A percentage would benefit me. It should be a set dollar amount. But it's expensive. Even $600 a year as a 401k match is $123 million recurring. So it's a lot of money. But just when we start talking about these benefit packages, there are some things that are happening at the local level that are working really well at the local level as far as these benefit packages, that I think we can implement some of those at the state level and benefit our state employees. The point of me saying all that to you, Loretta, and to the audience is that I think it was a philosopher, T.S. Eliot, that once said, hell is where nothing connects. You know, the early depictions of hell in Hollywood were where people's arms were extended and they never touched. Well, this is not hell, this is North Carolina. So all these things that we talk about, whether it's retention, recruitment, surpluses, electric vehicles, all this stuff connects back to something else. And we have to have conversations, as I said earlier, that are based on not politics and not emotion, but based on mathematics. And by doing that, I'm optimistic that we can provide certainty and sustainability, not just to the taxpayer and the road user, but also the vendors who are represented in this audience.
Hey, Loretta, before we leave this, though,
Yeah.
a point I can't let this go by without mentioning, and certainly we're concerned about inflation, where we are coming out of COVID, and certainly that had a big impact. We're seeing things that we don't have control over, like, let's say, the war in Ukraine, which is driving energy costs and a lot of things out of whack all around the world, but certainly through Europe. But I got to mention, though, that and while we're concerned about inflation, and you alluded to this in one of your earlier questions, we've had a couple of big pieces of federal legislation. And while we want to keep an eye on the federal debt, these federal legislation that we've seen come out in the last couple of years have been significant in the transportation and infrastructure sectors. And we've opened some spigots, and we've opened up some spigots even wider to get dollars flowing into continuing to improve our transportation and infrastructure. And I can't let this conversation go without saying that we've seen some good work at the federal level, and we've had real infrastructure legislation coming out in the last couple of years that is going to make North Carolina, will have North Carolina benefit from. So got to throw that one in.
I'll stick with you, Senator Woodard, for our next question. STIP has been in place now for several years. Do you think that in its current form it's still working the way it was meant to? Are there adjustments that need to be made to that?
I think generally it's working, and that was one of the first things when I came in 2013 was working on the STIP. It's a complicated formula about how it works, and sometimes it's hard for everybody to understand, particularly if they don't work on it like the four of us legislators do. Local governments sometimes don't always understand how the STIP works, but I think it was the right step to move us forward. It got us out of a lot of the political games we were playing with transportation funding that had been the hallmark, frankly, of North Carolina transportation for years, and it put a process in. But like any formula, any good piece of machinery, it needs tweaking from time to time. I mentioned earlier, I would love to see the STIP have some tweaks that would give us some more latitude on bike and pedestrian projects and other forms of transportation, particularly to help our urban communities. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just think maybe we need to change the bathwater every now and then and keep things going. So some tweaks, yes, but generally supportive of the concept of the STIP as we implemented it back in 2013.
How about you, Senator McGinnis? Do you think it's working?
I do, and the biggest thing that it did was to take the politics out of road construction in North Carolina, which we all know what that was for decades. If you had the high-ranking senator or the high-ranking member of the House or council of state in your neighborhood and you needed a new road or a road widening or a new bridge, it kind of happened. And you know, that's not the way we need to operate in this state. We need to operate as the STIP lays out.
Or a powerful DOT board member.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we need to continue on there. And as Senator Woodard so eloquently stated, everything we do always needs a forward look every now and then because, again, modern technology is continuing to evolve at a greater speed than ever. We need to make sure that those are employed into the system as well.
Representative Shepherd, are there any things you'd like to see perhaps tweaked in the STIP?
Yes, I was one of the primary sponsors when we passed this TIP back in the day, and I saw the reason for it because in history I had seen where sometimes it was someone that was a big donor to somebody in politics could get their driveway paved 100 yards or a mile up in a field, and so I knew that a lot of things were going on that weren't necessarily what was right or legitimate. But I do think it should be tweaked. For instance, in my district, we've got a road project that's behind now because of the funding loss that we had a few years ago. And we're expecting 20,000 people to move into Onslow County because Marstock on the west coast is moving down to Sneads Ferry area, as well as we are expecting 10,000 contractors and their families to come because the DOD is doing $3 billion worth of work at Camp Lejeune. So with that being said and done, the estimates are 20,000 people between now and next year. And that particular road project is where they're all going to be coming from and driving through. And it's behind. And so I think there should be some tweaks. Sometimes things happen overnight that you're not expecting, act of God or whatever. And I think there should be some tweaks. I don't think we should throw it out because I think it was a great bill when it was passed, but it probably could use some tweaking for certain situations.
What do you think of it, Treasurer Falwell? Modernization to it?
Well, as they've already said, it could always be looked at, and anything can be improved on, especially in government. And what we're really talking about over the last hour is that we have to use the talents God gave us to see what needs to be seen. We need to be humble enough to listen for what needs to be heard, and courageous enough to act on what needs to be done. And what that means for these legislators and the road-using public is, the public just wants to be spoken to like an adult, and what they hear needs to make common sense. That's all they don't want anything more or anything less than that. But I will say that at the end of the day, the legislators, the DOT, the executive branch, they have to think inside the box, outside the box, and then once they figure out what direction to go in, they have to figure out how to use both sides of the box. And if that involves, looking at the stiff, then that can become an important part of that process.
I'll bring that question to you also, Representative Jones. Do you see that there's any modernization that should happen with it?
Just like each one of the gentlemen said, yes. But one of the hardest things for me when I came into state government was it did not move like business. It's a slower pace, but learning why was huge. Taking the politics out of the DOT was the best thing that ever happened to DOT. And we did get behind a little bit because of previous folks that ran that, but under the current administrator of the STIP that's running it, I think it's moving very, very well. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and I think everyone's open to any ideas. But I've heard over the interim, there were some thoughts of putting it in the public sector, which I think would be a huge mistake. We've spent many, many years, starting back with Representative Shepherd back about a decade ago, looking at this. So this is a problem that's been a problem. It's going to be a problem, but I think we're in way better shape than we've ever been. I think we've got a good administrator who understands this state and priorities. And I think we're in a good spot, and I think there's always tweaks to that, and I think everyone's open to those tweaks.
Okay. For our last question, I'm going to bring this to you first, Senator McInnes. We've heard a lot about electric vehicles and alternatives to internal combustion engines. How does our state ease into moving to cleaner transportation without abruptly impacting the current mechanism?
Well, Loretta, one thing that's got to happen is we have to have the infrastructure in place. And right now we don't. We don't have our grid in place, nor do we have the charging stations in place. And that has to happen. It's a chicken and the egg deal here now. We've got to have the preparation before we can have the execution. So I think once that is in line, and I know that the governor's come forward with an executive order, the General Assembly has made great strides. Federal government, as Senator Woodard alluded to, has brought forth resources and guidance for these types of infrastructure improvements, and so we've got to make sure that the things are in place before we move it forward, lest we get on the wrong side of that prosperity.
I'll ask you the same question, Representative Shepherd, when we're looking towards these.
I'm certainly interested, and I'm open to all conversations, but I agree with Senator McInnes. I think there are some issues that we need to take care of, and we need to be proactive as far as getting those things ready. But, the average consumer out there, I don't think is ready for that yet. Some are, some aren't. But we need to move forward, taking our time and doing it right.
Okay. Treasurer Falwell?
I agree with what's already been said. They're racing electric motorcycles now. So, the electrification of things has already gotten into the dirt bike racing world as well as the road bike motorcycle world. So obviously, whether it's the infrastructure to charge these vehicles or how do you fund for education when these vehicles are using the roads is vitally important. At the end of the day, what we need to, as I said earlier, we have to focus on the mathematics. we can know that, electrification is coming. I believe the statistic came out this morning at 10%. I think somebody is here from North Carolina Automobile Dealers Association. I think 10% of the new vehicles sold last year were electric vehicles worldwide. I think that number came out this morning. So this is not nothing. This is real. But being able to do it in a way where people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think is vitally important. And I think we're capable of doing that.
Representative Jones.
Well, being the only member who spent their entire life in the transportation industry, and seeing the changes that I have seen the 30-plus years that I've been involved, from vehicles getting 15 miles a gallon to now 30, 40, 50, 60 miles per gallon. And I've never liked being told, this is it. This is what you're going to do, without understanding the big picture. What works in Charlotte and Raleigh does not work in Whiteville or in Burgaw. You take what happened in Moore County. So if Senator McInnes's citizens were all in electric vehicles, where would they have been? You take where I'm from during the hurricane, we were out 7, 10, 12 days with no power. Where would we be? I'm not anti-EV at all. I am pro-EV. But I do not think it's a one-size-fits-all. I think it's a matter of, if I lived in Raleigh and I across town here, I think that would be absolutely what I would have. But if I'm Brent Watts in Columbus County, one of the largest farmers, farming 3,000 acres, in my 2,500 Denali truck, I don't know that EV is going to pull those tobacco drags all day long. So I think we've got to be very careful forcing something on a society that's not ready. Proof our grids are not ready. We're not ready. Rural North Carolina's not ready. We're talking about greener energy, and I think we've made great strides. If we really dive down, if we look at what it takes to mine lithium and cobalt for one battery, those gases would weigh what a great white shark would weigh. So I don't know that it's that much cleaner. Or if you take a Tesla compared to a CRV, you'd have to run about 20,000 miles to get to a break even. So I'm not sure that we're there yet, and I don't know that the cleaner energy part is there yet. And I've spoken with a lot of folks that's in the industry, and I think we've got some growing to do before we make these mandates that say we have to do something. We're looking to move into electric school buses, but you take a rural area like mine, that bus may have to run 70, 80, 90 circled miles to come back in with an idle time of 4 or 5 hours. Is it going to be enough to safely move those kids back and forth at this time? So I just think we need to take a real slow down, take a real good look. When the electricity came, it was not an initiative that every house had to have electricity put in it. It took some time. I'm just old enough that I can remember houses in Columbus County not having electricity or running water. They were still there. So that would have been in the 70s. So I think we shouldn't force anything. I think there's room to grow. There's time for these initiatives to take place. And the infrastructure will come as it's needed in the state.
I'll let you finish this out, Senator Woodard.
Yeah, I think I'm going to push back a little bit on the question, because the question had the verb, how do we ease into a cleaner future? And I've got to say, I don't think we don't have time to ease into it. Look what's happened in California the last few weeks. We've seen a lot of reports recently about, our warming environment. Heck, I rode around with the sunroof open yesterday when it was 72 degrees. Here we are in mid-January, and I was enjoying the warm weather. So while I hear the caution from my colleagues about these, and I certainly agree with those, that we've got to be careful, we've got to be thoughtful, we've got to be intentional about as we move ahead. But we can't ease into it. There is a call to action. Our climate needs us to respond. So we've got to find that path forward where we're not going hog wild on some of these things, as Representative Jones has suggested, and a thoughtful approach Senator McInnes talked about. But we don't have time to wait. We have got to move to cleaner energy. And frankly, I think as a state, we have the opportunity to be a leader in providing that cleaner energy, and provide our truck manufacturers. I had a chance to meet with them a few weeks back, and we've got some great truck manufacturers in this state who are ready to move ahead using some of these technologies. So I hope what our job is as the elected officials and as the department working on this is that we find a way to facilitate moving to that clean energy future in that careful, thoughtful way, but let's start moving into it quickly.
Okay. I think you've all given us a lot to think about when it comes to transportation. You're obviously going to have a lot to think about during this legislative session. That is all the time that we have for this session. I want to thank all of the panelists and thank you to the audience. Now I'll ask NCDOT's Chief Operating Officer, Joey Hopkins, to join us here on the stage.
Thank you, Loretta.
Thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to host again. We appreciate you coming back. Let's give the panelists a big round of applause. It's always interesting to me to get a small peek inside the brains of these people who make great decisions and help lead our state, and we're thankful for that. Your presence here today demonstrates how important the future is. And we also appreciate any time our state leaders consider new ways to support the department, help us deliver projects our communities need to meet the demands of our growing state. We thank all of y'all for your dedication to transportation in North Carolina. Over the past 2 days, we have all learned a great deal and had an opportunity to look at new ideas and innovative technologies, and also consider if those ideas or technologies would be a good fit for our state. These are critical conversations we must continue to have. We appreciate all of you for being a part of planning for our future. If we do this right, North Carolina will be in a strong position to compete globally for generations to come. And now for a little fun. It's time to announce the winner of the in-app game. We had more than 160 people opt in this year for a chance to win a Summit-themed prize pack. And there ended up being a 6-way tie for first place. So congratulations to all 6 that tied for first place. After a random drawing, the winner of the prize is Levi Olds. Levi, are you still in the building? If you are Levi, or if you know Levi, he can pick up his gift at the speaker and staff room on the main level, past the main doors on the right. If he's not here, we'll get that to him. Before we close, I'd like to take a second to thank all of our sponsors and exhibitors one more time. Let's give them a big round of applause. This event would not be possible without your support. Again, we thank our partner, NC Go, and their chair, Mark Finlayson. Thank you for your partnership, Mark. Your organization has been behind this event since the very beginning, and we're thankful for the partnership we have. Thank you to all of our speakers, our board members, and staff who put this event together. I need to especially thank one person in their staff, Carly Oleksic, our communications director, and our communications office staff. Somebody said this yesterday, they literally are planning for next year's summit already. So it takes a lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of planning and replanning and planning again because plans change. So thank you, Carly, and everybody in your office has been involved in this. And finally, thank each of you for attending. Your support for transportation in North Carolina has helped us achieve so much, and we look forward to working together in the future. However you travel home today, please travel safely. Thank you for coming.